a loud enough voice to carry, I think. Can everyone hear me? The subcommittee is meeting today to receive testimony on the FY 2020 budget request for U.S. Customs and Border Protection, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. I want to thank the administration officials who came here this morning to testify and provide additional details about their priorities and programs for the coming fiscal year. But I'm going to be frank with everyone here today. This budget request is deeply flawed and seems to double down on a number of highly questionable policies that have been patently and repeatedly rejected by Congress over the past 2 years. That includes billions of dollars for a useless border wall and hundreds of millions of dollars for additional detention space for migrant families. Let me be clear, these items were non-starters in last year's budget, and they will be non-starters this year too. The FY 2020 CBP budget proposal includes a $5 billion request for a border wall, while simultaneously eliminating or reducing funding for several technology-oriented security measures, including video surveillance and cross-border tunnel detection systems. Shockingly, the proposed budget would also drastically reduce funding for non-intrusive inspection systems, which scan for drugs, guns, and other contraband at ports of entry. Last year, Congress allocated over $500 million to procure new NII systems. In the 2020 budget, the President requests just $59 million. That is not enough. We have been over this time and time again. We need to continue investing in proven border security technology. It works, and it works well. Eliminating funding for something as effective as NII systems is reckless and dangerous, and it will hamper our ability to secure our border. There is overwhelming evidence of that. In FY 2018, 90% of heroin was seized at ports of entry by CBP officers, while only 10% was seized between ports. CBP officers at ports of entry also seized 81% of fentanyl in the same period. NII systems play an indispensable role in these types of seizures. Meanwhile, there is absolutely no evidence that a border wall would be more effective in stopping contraband from crossing the border, none whatsoever. Nevertheless, here we are again litigating this issue. The President himself frequently talks about the horrors of human trafficking and of the families that have been devastated by the opioid epidemic. Yet given the chance to actually do something about it, to actually invest in the resources that will help prevent those tragedies, he opts for a border wall, something that only serves to bolster his ego and irrevocably harm our border communities. It's hard to believe that this needs to be said, but clearly it does. Our committee is not in the business of funding ridiculous xenophobic campaign promises. We are in the business of securing our border and ensuring the efficacy of our border operations. And we will not sign off on a budget that is chock full of baseless, politically motivated line items that would only leave our border more vulnerable than it already is. And this brings me to my next point. This committee is not just responsible for ensuring border security, we are also responsible for making sure that security apparatus does not undermine a fair, thorough, and humane immigration and asylum process. And this budget woefully fails to deliver on that as well. First and foremost, the FY 2020 budget creates something called the Border Security and Immigration Enforcement Fund, which appears to use USCIS fees to fund an expansion of detention capacity to 60,000 beds, including a 300% increase in family detention space, as well as an increase in law enforcement and prosecution-related personnel. As I see it, this fund only further advances USCIS's alarming change in focus from an agency responsible for facilitating and granting immigration benefits into an enforcement arm for this president to execute his cruel and punitive immigration agenda. Thus far, USCIS has not answered questions about this fund, instead directing questions to the White House. I can assure you that we will get the answers here today. Second, in addition to the 60,000 beds that the FY 2020 budget proposes, it also requests funding for 54,000 ICE detention beds, a significant increase over the 40,520 cap in the FY 2018 and 2019 appropriation bills. ICE has continuously ignored the bed caps and still exceeds its current bed capacity today as it carries out Trump's anti-immigration agenda. Immigration detention is supposed to be civil detention. However, I have seen ICE detention facilities, and I can assure you there is nothing civil about them. ICE's detention facilities look and feel like prisons. I saw them with my own eyes last month when I led a delegation from this committee down to El Paso. These facilities are chronically cited for conditions that are hazardous to the health and safety of its detainees, including lack of medical care, overuse of solitary confinement, spoiled and rotten food, and unreported health and security incidents. And that's to say nothing of the repeated reports of abuse toward LGBTQ individuals, pregnant women, and other vulnerable populations. To make matters worse, ICE has consistently failed to hold detention facilities accountable to performance standards. How in good conscience can we increase their capacity for detention when they have proven incapable of properly overseeing their existing facilities? On May 1st, 2019, OMB sent a letter to the Speaker requesting an emergency appropriation of $4.5 billion for the remainder of FY 2019 to address the, quote, humanitarian and security crisis at the southern border. Of that $4.5 billion, $1.1 billion was for DHS. And what did DHS say they would use that money for? Additional detention beds, rapid DNA testing for individuals that CBP and ICE believe could be human smugglers disguised as family units, and training for Border Patrol agents to begin administering credible fear screenings to families that they apprehend. All the while, this administration continues to illegally curtail and criminalize our asylum process. They have continued to implement the metering process, whereby the administration limits the number of people who are permitted to apply for asylum each day, and they have maintained the Remain in Mexico policy, where migrants and asylum seekers are forced to wait in Mexico while their asylum cases are processed. Taken together, these two strategies have led asylum seekers and migrants to cross in between ports of entry, which is far more dangerous. Last week, Bishop Mark Seitz from the Catholic Diocese of El Paso, Texas, testified before this subcommittee. He described the dangerous conditions he saw in Mexico along the U.S. border. He specifically called on the Trump administration to end policies like migrant protection protocols, also known as Remain in Mexico, that force asylum seekers to wait in Mexico under grave safety, humanitarian, and due process concerns. And not only does this policy put tremendous stress on our Mexican partners, it has also proven to be deeply flawed. For example, several migrants subject to Remain in Mexico received notices to appear in immigration court, but with an incorrect court date or no date at all. And even though the migrant could not have possibly shown up for a court date they did not know about, some have been ordered removed in absentia. It's things like this that make a mockery of our entire immigration system. And then, of course, there are the president's absurd threats to close the border altogether or charge fees for asylum applications. But this is what happens when you prioritize fear-mongering and campaign slogans over thoughtful border policies, like addressing chronic personnel challenges and helping our Central American neighbors. President Trump's proposed DHS budget is simply a continuation of his misguided, short-sighted, enforcement-only approach to border security and immigration. And at this point, we know all too well how that ends. It will undoubtedly lead to the inhumane treatment of migrants and severe misallocations of limited DHS resources. And if anyone has any doubts about that, then I would remind them of the administration's horrifying family separation policy, which plunged DHS into a state of utter chaos and paralysis and caused unimaginable trauma to thousands of children. When does it stop? When will this administration wake up to the reality that these policies are not only inhumane, they are not only un-American, but they are actually undermining our ability to secure our border? These policies make us less safe. We cannot continue down this road. We cannot continue allowing this administration to divert resources away from solutions and distort DHS's critical mission. We need to focus on and invest in the proven common sense strategies that will address both the humanitarian and security challenges at the border, and that's what I intend to do here today. With that, I now recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today to present President Trump's fiscal year 2020 budget for Customs and Border Protection, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and Citizenship and Immigration Services. Law enforcement professionals tasked with actually securing our border agree that we need layered security, enhanced 21st century security to control the incredible flow of human trafficking and illegal crossings. We need enhanced technology to detect an incoming illegal crossing, enhanced physical barriers to delay and deter that crossing, enhanced capacity to respond to that detected and deterred crossing, and enhanced capacity to process once arrests are made appropriately according to the law. Budgets for border security should be determined based upon the actual needs as expressed by the law enforcement professionals on the ground and commanders in the field, not by politicians and bureaucrats in D.C. I've said in every hearing held this year, and I'll say again, there's a growing humanitarian, national security, and illegal immigration crisis at the southwest border. This fiscal year, CBP is on track to apprehend the highest number of migrants in 12 years. This increase in new migrant crossings has pushed our ability to properly manage our southern border and enforce our immigration laws. We've been pushed to the breaking point and beyond. Migrants processing facilities along the border are continuing to be pushed far past their capacity. Border Patrol is apprehending record numbers of groups of 100 migrants or more. It's very challenging to deal with. CBP just reported that they encountered over 100,000 people at the southwest border in April of this year alone, nearly a 600% increase since 2017. Law enforcement officers are being taken off the line of duty to transport and accompany migrants to hospitals once they reach our border in deteriorating health. This is unsustainable. For political reasons, perhaps, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have hesitated to even admit that a crisis exists. During the last fiscal year, there was attempts to zero out funding for additional Border Patrol agents, to zero out funding for additional ICE agents, and to block supplemental appropriations language to support our men and women along the border. This effort to defund border security is an attack on law enforcement. It forces illegal migrants to be released en masse into our border communities and prevents ICE from arresting criminal aliens who threaten public safety. Because of this inaction, last week the administration submitted the fiscal year 2019 supplemental budget request to Congress for $4.5 billion in humanitarian assistance. I encourage my colleagues to set aside their hatred for President Trump and work to address the crisis at the border. I stand ready to work with members on both sides of the aisle to pass legislation in support of this necessary supplemental request. Today, we will examine the President's fiscal year 2020 budget request and determine if it is adequate in providing CBP, ICE, and USCIS with the tools and resources necessary for them to carry out their mission. I was happy to see increases made to the CBP and ICE budgets to address the crisis at the border and at least deliver a down payment on border security called for by the law enforcement professionals on the ground. The President's fiscal year 2020 budget funds the construction of approximately 300 miles of enhanced physical barriers and needed 21st century technology. Important access roads and the ability to respond is included in this budget. The budget also makes strong investments in frontline personnel to hire an additional 1,000 ICE law enforcement officers, 750 Border Patrol agents, 171 CBP Port of Entry officers, 128 immigration court processing attorneys, and the necessary associated support personnel. I was encouraged to see that the request includes strong investments in Homeland Security investigations to find and prosecute cross-border criminals, including terrorists, transnational criminal organizations, human traffickers, and all those who participate in sexual exploitation. President Trump has determined to do what it takes to secure the homeland, and I support this thoroughly justified budget. Today, we're fortunate to have experts before us who can explain why they need these resources and how they will be deployed. I look forward to the testimony of our witnesses. I respect my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Higgins. Other members of the committee are reminded that under the committee rules, opening statements may be submitted for the record. I welcome our panel of witnesses. Our first witness is Mr. Robert Perez, the Deputy Commissioner for U.S. Customs and Border Protection. In this role, he serves as the agency's senior career official, overseeing the personnel who work every day to protect our nation's borders. During his 26-year career in federal law enforcement, Mr. Perez has also served as the Director of Field Operations in CBP's New York field office and in Detroit, Michigan, and held various other positions at CBP headquarters. Next, we have Mr. Matthew Albence, the current Acting Director for U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Mr. Albence oversees ICE's day-to-day operations and manages its operational and mission support personnel. Previously, he led ICE's Enforcement and Removal Operations Directorate and has more than 24 years of federal immigration law enforcement experience. Finally, we have Ms. Tracy Renaud, the Acting Deputy Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. She has also held a number of positions at USCIS headquarters, including Chief of Field Operations and Deputy Associate Director of Refugee, Asylum, and International Operations. Ms. Renaud has spent more than 32 years working in the area of immigration benefits and services. Without objection, the witness's full statements will be inserted in the record. I now ask each witness to summarize his or her statement for 5 minutes, and we'll start with Mr. Perez.
Chairwoman Rice, Ranking Member Higgins, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I'm honored to represent the nearly 60,000 men and women of U.S. Customs and Border Protection and speak to you about our fiscal year 2020 budget request. Across the board, CBP employees continue to perform difficult and at times dangerous work in complex and a dynamic environment. The President's fiscal year 2020 budget includes a combined total of $18.2 billion that enables CBP to carry out our mission through a range of investments needed to secure our nation against 21st century threats. The funds included in the fiscal year 2020 budget support our critical mission initiatives in border security, trade and travel, counterterrorism, and other organizational improvements. The need for investment in border security has never been greater. We are in the midst of an ongoing humanitarian and national security crisis on our southwest border. Last month, CBP apprehended over 109,000 migrants along our southern border, more than 66% of which were families and unaccompanied children. 2 days last month, we apprehended over 5,000 migrants within one 24-hour period, and so far this fiscal year, we've encountered 148 large groups of over 100 people. The increases in families and children coming across our border in large groups and often remote areas presents unique challenges to our operations and facilities. Our resources are outpaced by this crisis. Our system is well beyond capacity. As a career law enforcement professional with over 26 years of experience, I can tell you, I have never seen anything like the crisis we are experiencing now. We must secure our border, and working together, I know we can find solutions to do so. With regard to border security, the three primary areas of investment in the fiscal year 2020 budget are infrastructure, technology, and personnel. Funding provided for CBP in this budget supports construction of approximately 200 miles of new border wall system, including real estate and environmental planning, land acquisition, and construction. Alongside the border wall system, technology is a critical tool that increases our situational awareness and decreases risks to the safety of our frontline personnel. The fiscal year 2020 budget request proposes investing in the sustainment and continued deployment of technology to strengthen border security operations between the ports of entry in the land, air, and maritime environments. But an organization is only as good as its people, and CBP has made it a top priority to attract, hire, train, and recruit a world-class workforce. The 2020 budget includes an increase of $164.5 million to support hiring, training, and equipping of 750 additional Border Patrol agents and 145 mission support personnel. CBP is also actively working to minimize attrition and fill positions in hard-to-fill locations. In addition to border security, facilitating lawful trade and travel is a crucial part of CBP's mission. The 2020 budget provides $62.6 million to support the procurement and recapitalization efforts of non-intrusive inspection technologies at our ports of entry that enable CBP to detect materials and contraband that may pose a threat to our country. The budget also requests an increase in funding for 267 CBP officers, agriculture specialists, trade and revenue positions, and mission and operational support personnel. In today's dynamic threat environment, detecting terrorists and criminals is paramount for our national security. To unify and streamline the vetting of international travelers and visa and immigration benefit applicants, the 2020 budget also includes $31.5 million to fund positions, tools, and system enhancements for the National Vetting Center. Finally, the fiscal year 2020 budget dedicates $54.9 million in critical investments to organizational initiatives which will enable CBP to mature and develop our capabilities and business processes to meet the challenges of tomorrow. Our goal is to be the most innovative and trusted law enforcement agency in the world, and we're taking active measures to make that goal a reality. With the ongoing support of Congress, CBP will continue to secure our nation's borders while facilitating international trade and travel. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for your testimony. I now recognize Mr. Albans to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairwoman Rice, Ranking Member Higgins, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss ICE's $9.3 billion fiscal year 2020 budget request. While this represents a $1.2 billion increase from the FY 2019 enacted budget, this increase is critical for ICE to meet its current and future mission needs, and it will enable ICE to invest its necessary personnel, equipment, and systems. In particular, it provides resources and officers to address an increasing number of at-large criminal aliens and the ever-growing fugitive alien population, those who have been provided due process and have been determined by a judge to have no lawful right to remain in the United States, numbering at more than 570,000 people. This increase in funding also provides for attorneys to reduce the rapidly expanding non-detained alien docket, transportation costs for removals, medical care for detainees, UAC transportation, expansion of criminal investigative personnel to combat opioids, child exploitation, human smuggling, and the deleterious impacts of transnational gangs across the United States. ICE's Homeland Security Investigations Special Agents protect the United States against terrorists and other criminal organizations through criminal and civil enforcement of federal laws governing border control, customs, trade, and immigration. The FY 2020 budget maintains HSI's critical operations abroad, supports hiring of an additional 150 domestic special agents, and increases our efforts to target and combat dangerous transnational gangs and other criminal organizations. In FY 18, HSI made 4,333 arrests of gang leaders, members, and associates, including 959 Mara Salvatrucha MS-13 members. Our special agents helped take more than 750 firearms off the street through these investigations, and we intend to expand on that success going forward. Additionally, last FY, HSI identified and assisted more than 1,477 crime victims, including 308 human trafficking victims and 715 child exploitation victims. Leveraging its border enforcement security task forces, HSI is increasing investigation and enforcement activities combating organizations that illicitly introduce and distribute fentanyl, heroin, methamphetamine, and cocaine into and throughout the United States. Narcotics enforcement efforts throughout FY 18 resulted in more than 11,400 criminal arrests, with seizures totaling more than 1 million pounds. Another component of HSI's international engagement, the Visa Security Program, maximizes the visa process as a counterterrorism tool to identify, exploit, and disrupt transnational terrorist and criminal networks seeking to harm the United States. In FY 18, the VSP screened almost 2.2 million non-immigrant visa applicants at high-risk diplomatic posts. From those applicants, VSP made over 1,200 nominations or enhancements to the terrorist watch list and recommended the refusal of over 9,000 visa applications. The Biometric Identification Transnational Migration Alert Program, known as BITMAP, is managed by HSI in collaboration with the Department of Defense and Customs and Border Protection. Through BITMAP, HSI extends the U.S. border by targeting high-risk subjects who attempt to enter the United States utilizing illicit pathways. Under this program, HSI trains and equips foreign counterparts to tactically collect biometric and biographic data on special interest aliens, gang members, and other persons of interest as identified by the host country. In FY 18, BITMAP enrolled over 41,000 persons of interest, including over 100 biometric enrollments or amendments to records of known and suspected terrorists. From an enforcement and removal operations perspective, DHS and ICE continue to work to balance effective law enforcement with the overwhelming number of aliens, including family units and unaccompanied alien children, arriving at our borders. The increase in the flow of migrants and the change in those who are arriving at our border are putting migrants, particularly young children, at risk of harm from smugglers, traffickers, criminals, and the dangers of the difficult journey. ERO remains committed to directing its enforcement resources toward those aliens posing the greatest risk to the safety and security of the United States, as well as to maintain the integrity of our border. In FY 2018, ICE housed a daily average of 42,188 aliens, with 61% of the aliens booked into detention stemming from CBP or border apprehensions, a number which has swelled to 75% during FY 19 as a result of the ongoing crisis. Consequently, additional detention capacity will be necessary to prevent the expansion of catch and release. Specifically, the budget includes nearly $2.7 billion to increase detention capacity to support an average daily adult population of 51,500 and an average daily family population of 2,500, for a total of 54,000 beds, and also includes augmentation for ground and air transportation-related alien movements and removals. Securing our borders is a fundamental national security priority as well as a humanitarian issue. However, we can never achieve strong border security without effective interior enforcement. In FY 18, ERO officers removed over 250,000 illegal aliens and made over 150,000 interior arrests, with more than 138,000 of those having criminal histories. The FY 2020 budget request includes attorney resources to ensure that ICE is able to carry out its statutory responsibility to prosecute removal proceedings before immigration courts. There are currently over 870,000 pending cases before the immigration courts, and ICE attorneys are an indispensable part of the immigration hearing process. In FY 2018, ICE obtained over 122,000 orders of removal for a ratio of more than 150 cases per attorney. With the hundreds of additional immigration judges at DOJs in the process of hiring, it is critical that we be resourced at a level which ensures that aliens charged with immigration violations have their cases completed efficiently and either receive relief to which they are entitled or are removed promptly. Simply put, an inadequate augmentation of OPLA resources will prevent the realization of the efficiencies envisioned by the substantial increase in immigration judges and will not reduce the massive backlog of cases. Looking ahead, the men and women of ICE will continue to do their sworn duty to enforce all laws with which we are charged, removing the scourge of illegal narcotics from our communities, dismantling gangs that prey upon the vulnerable, protecting children from sexual exploitation, and arresting, detaining, and removing criminal aliens, public safety threats, known or suspected terrorists, and immigration violators, all of which are critical to the national security, border security, and the safety and well-being of our country. Thank you again for inviting me today and providing me the privilege of representing the outstanding, dedicated professionals in every job series, program, and assignment within this great agency. I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you for your testimony. I now recognize Ms. Renaud to summarize her statement for 5 minutes.
Chairwoman Rice, Ranking Member Higgins, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to discuss the fiscal year 2020 budget proposal of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. My name is Tracy Renaud, and I'm the Acting Deputy Director of USCIS. I've had the honor to serve this agency and its predecessor, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, since 1982. As the agency that administers the lawful immigration system, we are proposing a budget of $4.8 billion, 97% of which comes from fees paid by those seeking certain immigration benefits. Of the proposed budget, $122 million would be appropriated funds to support the E-Verify program, which last year verified the employment eligibility of 38 million new hires. In addition, our budget proposal includes $25 million in fee revenue to build a USCIS Academy Training Center at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Charleston, South Carolina. A new headquarters building is under construction in Camp Springs, Maryland, and it will centralize operations and consolidate our staff from locations across the National Capital Region. The move is anticipated for fiscal year 2020. I'd like to focus on E-Verify for a moment because it's the appropriated portion of our budget. E-Verify is an electronic system that allows employers to confirm the eligibility of their employees to work in the United States. Nearly all confirmations occur instantly or within 24 hours. As of April 15th of this year, more than 855,000 employers were enrolled in E-Verify. USCIS previously received appropriated funding to modernize the technology behind E-Verify. The system can now handle nearly 11,000 users at once with scalable technology to accommodate future growth. We've also increased accuracy and efficiency by automating more data checks, providing the verification algorithms, and providing for employer data entry error checks. During the 35-day partial government shutdown, E-Verify suspended operations and was unavailable to employers. When the system resumed operations on January 27th, we received more than 600,000 requests, triple the volume we've ever seen in a given day. Between January 27th and February 1st, E-Verify successfully processed approximately 2 million requests. E-Verify's expanded capabilities, achieved through the modernization, made it possible to handle the unprecedented incoming volume and eliminate the backlog promptly and efficiently. We anticipate achieving full operating capability of E-Verify modernization by the fourth quarter of this fiscal year. Since 2016, we've experienced a period of unexpectedly high demand for immigration benefits. We are still feeling the wake from the extraordinary receipt growth of fiscal years 2016 and 2017. In fiscal year 2018, USCIS received more than 8 million petitions, applications, and requests for immigration benefits. The agency naturalized over 757,000 new citizens, a 5-year high, and issued nearly 1.1 million green cards to new lawful permanent residents. We're also undertaking several initiatives to realize efficiencies, focus resources, and better facilitate access to information, including shifting away from first-in, first-out processing of affirmative asylum cases and returning to a last-in, first-out process to help identify non-meritorious asylum claims earlier and place those individuals into removal proceedings sooner, and committing to making the filing and adjudications of applications a paperless process by the end of calendar year 2020, which will put the agency in a better position to allocate resources, spot trends, and work with other agencies. We continue to focus on filling positions and reducing vacancy rates and ensuring employee overtime is available to increase adjudication capacity. We're also focused on improving screening and vetting standards and procedures for immigration benefits, including expanding the use of in-person interviews for certain employment-based adjustment applications, enhancing screening and vetting in the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program with the goal to close security gaps and take a more risk-based approach to refugee admissions, and expanding the targeted site visit and verification program to take a more targeted approach to combating fraud and abuse. Our country and the world have changed significantly since I joined the service 37 years ago. Yet our immigration policies and practices have not kept pace. Our immigration system and our nation are vulnerable in new and dynamic ways. USCIS is dedicated to serving and safeguarding the American people, our nation, and our economy. I'm extremely proud of the hard work and professionalism I see every day from the people at USCIS. Again, thank you for allowing me to be here, and I look forward to answering your questions.
I thank all the witnesses for their testimony, and I will remind each member that he or she will have 5 minutes to question the panel. I will now recognize myself for questions. I'm going to put this question to all 3 of the witnesses. There have been multiple news reports finding that the actual architect of the Trump administration's immigration agenda is White House advisor Stephen Miller. Have any of you ever been contacted by Stephen Miller?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I'll answer first. I've been in meetings with Mr. Miller at the White House, but that's it. Other than in a professional capacity with respect to my duties, I've had interaction.
And what was
with the
discussed
advisor.
at those meetings?
Pardon me, Madam
What was discussed at those meetings with Stephen Miller?
Various efforts of the department and of the agency with respect to our border security mission.
So broadly, the administration's policy and what it was going to be and how you were going to implement it at the border?
More so an exchange of ideas and how to implement what we believe are the best policies moving forward, yes.
That's what I said. Thank you. Mr. Albans?
Yes, ma'am. I've been contacted by Mr. Miller, been in meetings with him as well as with many other White House individuals.
And so, Mr. Albans, I'm asking about you, not other White House officials. It's a very simple question to you, not any other White House official. When he contacted you, what did he contact you about?
Generally, it's operational guidance with regard to the impact that a certain policy may have.
And he was directing to you what the policy, the White House policy was to make sure that you, as a soldier in the field, were implementing it correctly.
No, it was more of if we instituted this policy, could it be operationalized? How would it be operationalized? What would be the impact on the operations? It was more an exchange of ideas versus it was not a direction that I would do X, Y, or Z.
So he would speak to you about a policy, immigration policy that he had, and was asking you whether you thought it was going to work or not.
or if it could work, if it would be possible to implement, would be able to operationalize.
Ms. Renaud? And has he spoken to you about immigration policy and how it's going to be implemented at the border and elsewhere? Can you speak up?
Oh, thank you. The conference calls that I've participated on have been mostly seeking updates on implementation of either executive orders or presidential memorandums and status of where we are.
And he specifically was asking you, in your capacity, for data regarding your piece of that operation?
He's a participant. He doesn't chair the calls, and so whoever chairs the calls will do the
Did he
round
speak
robin.
on the calls?
Yes,
Did he ask questions?
yes.
Did he ask questions specifically of you?
Not of me, no.
Were you asked to give information?
Yes.
Mr. Albans, I want to go back to what I talked about in terms of, I think, one of the most shocking parts of the budget, which would drastically reduce funding for NII systems, which are specifically used to scan for drugs, guns, and other contraband at ports of entry. If you look at any public statement that the president makes, and people in his administration, whether it's his spokesperson or other people, about our biggest problem at the border, and that then becomes an interior problem in this country, it's drugs. So I think it doesn't make much sense to me that in his budget he would cut from $500 million to procure new NII systems to the 2020 budget where he requests just $59 million. Do you think that is a wise decision?
With all due respect, ma'am, that is on the CBP budget, so I would defer to my colleague here to answer that question.
I'll gladly answer for you, Madam Chairwoman. So,
Well, let me just say, Mr. Albans, we spoke about drugs when we met previously, so you have an opinion. What's your opinion?
Again, I can't speak to the money. I can tell you what we have learned in Homeland Security investigations that
I'm asking you, are you aware of the NII systems that are used?
a little bit, ma'am. I don't have.
Do you think they make sense?
From what I understand, they're effective systems, yes.
So do you think it makes sense to cut the procurement dollars for that technology?
I don't have insight into the whole CBP budget.
So you're
so I
not going to
can't
answer the
speak
question. Okay, Mr. Perez, can we go to you?
So, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. So, in the FY18 budget, we were provided, thanks to Congress, the ability to recapitalize.
So, Mr. Perez, I have very limited time. I have to interrupt you, and I'm very sorry.
So
I'm asking you one specific question.
Right.
Do you think it is a good decision for this administration to cut the budget for NII systems from $500 million to $59 million? Yes or no?
Since we have money between 18 and 19 to recapitalize nearly 75%, thanks to Congress, of our entirety of our NII systems, and we're balancing a very complex mission that's multifaceted.
Yes,
I don't
go ahead.
deem it unreasonable to position
So basically, you don't need any money. You don't even need the $59 million.
No, I'm saying we need all.
Yeah, I think it sounds like you don't even, I just saved us $59 million.
We'll gladly
Thank
take
you.
it, Madam Chairwoman.
Okay, Mr. Perez, thank you.
Thank you.
So I just have one question for Ms. Renaud. Despite the ongoing violence and political unrest that renders El Salvador unable to adequately handle the return of their nationals, then Secretary Nielsen announced the decision to terminate TPS status for El Salvador in January of 2018. Do you know what the reasons justifying the termination of TPS for El Salvador were?
I do not know the reasons off the top of my head, ma'am. I'd be happy to get you that information.
Did USCIS provide the secretary or anyone within the administration with an opinion as to whether TPS should be terminated or extended?
Yes, USCIS prepares country conditions for the secretary whenever there is going to be a determination made on TPS for any country, and along with that, we usually do provide a recommendation.
So what was your recommendation?
I don't recall, it's some time ago.
Are any of the Northern Triangle countries, or I shouldn't say that, I should say, so El Salvador along with Nicaragua and Honduras. Can you give us,
I don't
did
have
you
that
give
with
opinions
me,
about
but we gave
those?
opinions on all of those, and we.
You don't remember what they are now?
I don't on the.
So I'm going to ask you to please provide me with this committee with that information.
We'll follow up with you, ma'am.
So I just want to ask, we have a lot of people up here who want to ask questions. I ask direct questions. Can you please give direct answers? There's no filibustering on this subcommittee. So please, can we all use the time wisely, and can you answer in the most direct way possible? Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Mr. Higgins?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Regarding technology, Mr. Perez, with the purchase of new technology, would there be a requirement to replace that new technology every year?
Not every year,
Thank you.
Congressman.
I believe we try and keep to direct answers here. I believe most of the folks in the audience here have a laptop or an iPad. I don't know of anyone that replaces that technology every year. You had mentioned a number, I believe you said 75% of your systems have been upgraded or replaced with new technology?
We received funding, Congressman, between FY18 and 19 to recapitalize or replace over 230 of our 280 systems.
Okay, so just to clarify, you've already received funding to replace a large percentage of your technology that was indicated here. So would it not make sense that the budget decreases? Just common sense. We can move on. Let's talk about personnel, please. The budget request includes $163.6 million to recruit, hire, and train 750 additional Border Patrol agents. It's no secret that CBP experiences difficulties in recruiting, hiring, and retaining. It's a grueling job, and it's insane down there right now. I'm amazed at the retention that you're managing. How long would you project it would take, given flexibilities regarding hiring bonuses, retention bonuses, et cetera? Can you fulfill the hiring of 750 additional Border Patrol agents if we provide the budget for it?
Thank you, Congressman. We expect that we will. The time frame, I wouldn't want to speculate as to how long. I mean, right now, particularly with Border Patrol agents, our attrition rates are at about 6%, which is higher than our other law enforcement uniformed personnel. We've put in place a lot of hiring initiatives to retain more,
Do you have the flexibility needed at the command level regarding bonuses and retention bonuses, hiring bonuses, et cetera?
We do. However, it is part of the supplemental request that was put forward, and we're looking forward to getting that support.
Moving on, the President has requested $4.5 billion emergency supplemental funding for the crisis at the border. Mr. Perez, can you explain why these funds are so critical?
Thank you, Congressman. So in addition to the surging of now nearly or just over 1,000 CBP officers and Border Patrol agents along the southern border from parts all over the country, the nourishment, the procurement of consumables for primarily the families and the children that are in our custody for the time they are, the soft-sided facilities that we've put up recently. In addition to all of that and being able to fund what we've already done, everything that we expect to continue to have to be done in this urgent crisis is included in that supplemental request, along with some very critical support for our interagency partners, particularly in ICE.
Would funding directed within the supplemental request help the American men and women that work for you to respond to the humanitarian crisis?
Unquestionably so.
Okay, moving to Acting Director Albans. Would you explain to us, sir, the expansion of the 287G program in the form of the Warrant Service Officer program? We're talking about personnel. For a boots-on-the ground like me, this is significant. And it's difficult jobs, difficult to hire and retain. And you have determined a way to expand an existing 287G program within the parameters of the law to be a force multiplier for your endeavors at ICE. Would you explain the Warrant Service Officer program, please? I have 35 seconds.
Yes, sir. Thanks for the question. The Warrant Service Officer serves as a force multiplier for ICE. We only have about 6,000 or so sworn law enforcement officers within ERO. to cover the wide spectrum of duties that we have to do. The Warrant Service Officer allows us to deputize state and local law enforcement agents and deputies to execute immigration warrants on our behalf. So that way, individuals that are sitting in their custody, criminals that are here illegally, have committed a criminal violation,
That's
convicted.
The program essentially puts in place trained and certified officers at the state and local level,
Absolutely. It allows us to take our officers that are sitting in these detention facilities
automatic detainers.
and replace them with
Would
theirs.
you provide to the committee, please, some details and explanations of that program from our colleagues on both sides? I
happy
yield
to.
back, Madam Chairwoman.
So before we go on, I just want to go back to something that Mr. Alvin said. You had said before that 109,000 people had been apprehended between ports of entry. The actual number is 98,000. You include people who were actually presented themselves at a port of entry and were then turned away by CBP ICE. So I think it's important to be accurate. It's not 109,000, it's 98,000. I now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Correa.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and all of you, first of all, seem to have a tremendous history of serving our country. Thank you very much. I just returned from Central America, where I took a tour of the Triangle countries to look at what was going on. I concur with my colleague from Louisiana. We do have a crisis, and it's a refugee crisis, and it's one that's been going on probably since the 80s. It's just been invisible for the most part, and now when we have these caravans, I think it's easier to detect. I went to these three countries to ask what is going on, what is fueling all of this activity. The simple answer is a lot of violence, a lot of drugs, a lot of dollars that flow out of our country because of our insatiable appetite for drugs, that everybody's essentially on the take. There's so much money, there's so much violence, and most people are just looking for a better place. Lot of interesting things going on. Some of our aid has helped create some educational centers, some jobs, some local training, some deported individuals that are going back and trying to start lives. Good silver linings in those dark clouds. One of the other ones I found, I was pleasantly surprised, was to find fusion centers in those Central American countries where our FBI agents, DEA agents, other federal agencies working together to make sure that we track a lot of those individuals that are dangerous criminals that seem to move from one country to another, in and out. We talk a little bit, your testimony was about investing more resources to make sure we track these folks that I would call high serious risk. My question is, any of those resources also going to coordinate with groups like, or entities like fusion centers in Central America or Mexico?
Thank you, Congressman.
And you can make it a quick
We have a
answer. I've
significant
got
investment.
running up.
Homeland Security Investigations has attaché offices in each of these countries that work very closely with the law enforcement agencies in those countries. In fact, we have
Some of the budget that you requested to augment those efforts, or is that?
No, we will augment those efforts. We have transnational criminal investigative units. We have vetted officers from those foreign governments that work
Thank you.
with
You
our
answered my question. You mentioned 570,000 criminal aliens that you were following, or?
It was 570,000 immigration fugitives. So these are individuals that are here illegally.
Now, define a fugitive for me. Is that somebody who murder?
So an immigration fugitive is
Right.
an individual who has been through the entire immigration court process, has had their due process, and at the end of that process has been ordered removed by an immigration judge, but has failed to comply with that order. A portion of those, I don't have the exact number, but I believe it's around 130,000 or so, do have criminal records.
Your discussions with Mr. Miller, when you spoke to him, it was clearly immigration policy, how you're doing your job. My question is, again, all of you have very long careers in this area of government. When you talked to Mr. Miller or you were part of those discussions, did you find Mr. Miller asking your opinion as to what worked or didn't work? Or was it more Mr. Miller telling you the new vision that he wanted to implement in terms of immigration policy and immigration enforcement?
No, sir, it was the former. It was, we have this policy idea. How would it work? How would you operationalize it? Is it doable?
Child separation, was that something of a policy you came up with or he came up with?
No, sir. Wasn't involved in that.
Who came up with that?
I believe that was the former Attorney General developed a prosecution program. Zero tolerance prosecution program is what related.
One final question, I've got 40 seconds. Border Patrol agents hiring, recruiting. I know that, was it last year, the year before, we had that challenge where y'all were paying somebody a $10 million bonus to hire, to speed up the hiring of agents, and only about a dozen were hired. So my question is, have you changed the way you're looking for recruits? Are you going, for example, to college campuses? Are you going to, hire veterans, or are we still doing these $10 million for a dozen kind of programs?
Thank you, Congressman. Yes, we've put forth several initiatives to try to improve our hiring, targeted recruitment.
Very quickly,
fast
it's
track.
my understanding that the big issue in hiring agents is passing of the polygraph test, the lie detector test. And I was talking to some of the members of the local union. They were telling me it's easier for an FBI agent to pass than it is for an agent to actually pass there. Is that the case? Are we doing anything to change that specific issue?
Making sure we adhere to the practices and the policies that we have in place to make sure, to maintain the integrity. We feel we've made a lot of strides on the polygraph program, Congressman, that we're not experiencing nearly some of the challenges that we had a couple years ago. In addition to targeted recruitment for veterans, in addition to fast-track hiring processes to get people who are willing through the process much faster, last year actually was the first year that we actually got ahead in 5 years of Border Patrol agents, meaning bringing on more than we attrited. So we're encouraged moving forward that we're going to be able to continue to do the same.
Madam Chair, I'm out of time. I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Correa. The chair now recognizes Mr. Joyce from Pennsylvania for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And I thank our witnesses for being here today. Currently, there's a massive crisis on our southern border. Just last month's data of attempted illegal crossings represented more than a 100% spike over the previous year and a staggering 500% increase from 2 years ago. I witnessed this firsthand when I was at the southern border just last month. While I was there, I witnessed firsthand the lack of a secure border in areas along the Colorado River, which allows the cartels to smuggle drugs into our country, to smuggle drugs that end up in my district in south central Pennsylvania. There's another issue with the surge of people who seek to be apprehended at the border. They're brought into custody, they say prescribed words, and they're allowed access to American jobs, healthcare, and education that law-abiding citizens with no real ability for these individuals to verify their claims. This new group of family and unaccompanied minors arriving from Central America presents significant new challenges and is truly driving this crisis. Fully acknowledging that the majority has refused to even address this emergency request for funding sent to Congress by DHS Secretary McAleenan, do you think that the budget requests for fiscal year 20 are still in line with what is needed to protect our nation? This is a simple yes and no question, and I'll address Deputy Commissioner Perez first.
I'll say yes, Congressman.
Director Albence, do you feel that the budget requests are in line to address this crisis?
Yes, I do.
Second, thank you both. Secretary McAleenan also made requests to change the asylum laws, among other changes to alleviate the pressures at the border. These are similar to what legislations from Representative Collins that I co-sponsored would fix the Flores settlement and strengthen our asylum system. Do you believe that passing these laws would have impact on the crisis at the border? And if we pass them, do you think it would cut down on the amount of money we have to spend to address this crisis? In essence, will fixing our asylum system save taxpayers in the long run, without sacrificing our security? Again, I ask for your yes/no answers.
I'll say yes, but if I may, Congressman, I'll just add that it is the most urgent and immediate need that we need right now to deal with this crisis.
So let me clarify that. So passing the asylum laws would most be pressing for us to fix the problem that you face on the southern border.
That and fixing, having the ability to keep families together through an expedited immigration process and being able to return unaccompanied children to non-contiguous countries as long as they are not being trafficked. Fixes to FLORA's, TVPRA, and Asylum. Those are the three legal fixes that are most urgent now.
Mr. Albence, would you please comment as well?
Mr. Perez is absolutely correct.
Thank you both. I yield back my time to the ranking member.
Thank you, sir. Deputy Commissioner Perez, just give you an opportunity to clarify the numbers we have for border apprehensions for April were 98,977. You mentioned a number of 109,000. Will you clarify for the committee, please, where the other 9,000 law enforcement interactions were at the border?
Thank you, Congressman. Those are the 109,000 that I cited included not just apprehensions in between the ports of entry, but encounters at the ports of entry of inadmissible migrants. So that is the total number that we encountered, again, 109,000.
Thank you, sir. Madam Chair, I yield.
I thought that's what I said, but thank you for clarifying that. I now recognize for 5 minutes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thank the ranking member as well. And Madam Chair, it is an honor to serve under your leadership. I thank you for hosting this hearing. Mr. Albence, you are now the acting director of ICE, is this correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
But you have not always been the acting director. In 1994, you were with INS, is this correct?
Correct. I started as a special agent in San Antonio that year.
Special agent. And you have, through the years, seen a good many things take place at ICE. You know the history of ICE, do you not?
I've experienced many things, yes, sir.
You know that ICE has metamorphosed from the Office of the Superintendent of Immigration, created and placed in the Treasury Department in 1891, excuse me. And it has gone through a good many changes and metamorphosed into INS in 2003. ICE, according to this, the INS was abolished in 2003. Is that correct?
The various functions.
This is, by the way, coming from your homepage, so I'm reading from
Right, the
your
various
history.
functions within.
Without giving me the history, just let me ask you, is that correct? Was INS abolished?
It wasn't abolished. It was folded. Its responsibilities were folded into DHS.
Now, let me ask you this. Why would you have on your homepage that INS was abolished and its functions placed under 3 agencies?
I'd have to take a look at that page, but yes, the functions were separated between.
Okay,
CBP.
well, does INS exist now?
No, it does not.
Then it was abolished, wasn't it?
That's a term you can use, sure.
Well, it's a term that you use. I'm looking at your homepage.
Okay.
Would you, I hate to have, look now, I know the questions to ask. I'm not going to do it to you, but you'll agree, if you would, that INS does not exist now and it was abolished.
I agree it does not exist now, correct.
Okay. Well, let's just say it was abolished so that I don't have to go through another exercise. And the reason I'm sharing this with you is because you didn't complain when INS was abolished, did you?
Well, I would say there was a great bit of consternation on both the individuals from the Customs Service as well as INS during the time of the merger. It was a difficult merger for many individuals.
And the merger took place.
Yes, it took place.
And would you reverse it if you could?
I don't think I would reverse it because we've come so far and we've learned how to utilize both our customs and immigration authorities for the benefit of national security and public safety.
Yes, sir. And if you could, you would improve upon it, would you?
So the men and women of ICE come to work every day trying to do their job better
Yes, sir. So you would improve upon what you have, would you not?
If we can, yes.
Okay. So if someone, according to what you have here, has indicated that INS was abolished and ICE was created, one of the products, then if someone else said, well, look, let's improve upon ICE, let's abolish ICE, and let's create something that's better. And you thought that this something was better, just as you have acclimated to the iteration that was created in 2003, you would want to see that better thing take place, wouldn't you? You would want to see it, wouldn't you? You'd want to be one of the persons to support that, wouldn't you?
I can't envision an agency being better based on the
Well, let me just ask you this. All of these iterations, let's look at it. 1891, 1895, 1903, 1906, 1913, 1924, 1933, 1940, 2003. All of these changes is metamorphosed, and now we have perfection.
I would say that you have within
Would you
ICE,
say you have perfection?
I don't think anybody would say they have perfection.
Okay, that's what I'm looking for. You wouldn't say that. And because you don't have perfection, my assumption is that just as the president has said that Boeing, with its 737 MAX 8, ought to change the name, he said. Let's not call it the MAX 8. Let's improve upon it, and he said, give it another name. This is why you have a good many people saying, let's improve upon ICE. And it's okay for it to get another name, given that it has all of these other names that it has had through the years. Why not make it better? You understand the point, and I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Green. The chair now recognizes Mr. Guest, the gentleman from Mississippi, for 5 minutes. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
No worries.
The gentlewoman from Arizona, Ms. Lesko.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. First of all, I want to say thank you. Thank you for the work that you do, and I really want to thank all the men and women that work for you. Coming from the state of Arizona, the #1 issue of constituents in the state of Arizona in my district is securing the border. And we see the impacts each and every day. I've gone down and visited the border and met with some of the agents down there, and my staff has met with the ICE agents in Phoenix. And I applaud you for your hard work. This is hard work, and you're doing a lot of humanitarian work as well with the crisis that's going on the border, so I just want to say thank you. I do have several questions. Don't know if I can fit them all in or not. But similar to what Mr. Joyce said, I too am sponsoring legislation, and hopefully my staff can get together with you to talk about all of the details. But I had met with Secretary Nielsen in the past, and so I'm introducing a bill to tighten the credible fear standard, permit DHS to remove asylum seekers to safe third countries where they could apply for asylum without the need for bilateral agreements, to give more funds for more detention bed space and immigration judges. And I was just wondering what your thoughts were on it, and anybody can speak.
Thank you, Congresswoman, again for your support of our men and women. Certainly all those solutions are part of, again, a very complex mix of immediate solutions we need. I don't want to undersell the need, especially given the supplemental that was put forth, of resources now by virtue of the humanitarian, absolute humanitarian, overwhelming crisis we have, as well as the security crisis that goes right alongside that. But certainly, again, those legal fixes are, as I mentioned before, the most, in my professional opinion, urgent and immediate need that will make a huge difference in what it is we're dealing with.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been on record of saying we need the resources and the money. I think we need not only, we needed the funding for the border fence, because I think it's part of the solution, not the entire solution, but we need to change the laws, and that's up to Congress. I think the president is doing what he can. and because he has to protect our nation. That's his number one duty. That's our number one duty. And this is a security crisis and a humanitarian crisis. I remember Secretary Nielsen right here in this committee room saying how 11-year-old girls are being tested pregnancy tests. And I think 1 out of every 3 women is being raped. This is bad news. We really need to fix it. But let me go to the next question. The president's request, he wants to add 128 attorneys and 41 support staff for the ICE Office of the Principal Legal Advisor. And so in addition to immigration judges, Director Albans, why do you need the extra attorneys?
Well, the immigration courts can't proceed without those OPAL attorneys to actually present and prosecute those cases. So there's been a large increase of immigration judges over the past couple of years. There has not been a corresponding increase of OPAL attorneys. So without those OPAL attorneys, you could hire and bring on as many judges as you want. You will only make that bottleneck get worse.
Okay, thank you. My next question is, I've heard numerous stories about adults bringing in children to take advantage of our laws and our court settlements here. And some of those children aren't their children. And they're being recycled and sent back to their home country and then being exploited again. What are we doing to try to address that problem now?
Homeland Security investigations over the past 3 weeks has been surging resources to the Border Patrol sectors to start ferreting out these fraudulent families. In the matter of just a couple of weeks, we identified 256 potentially fraudulent families and confirmed that 65 of those were indeed fraudulent families. Within the first week, we found a young 7-year-old girl from Guatemala who was on her second trip to the country, whose mom had rented her to her uncle so that he could come to the country because he knew that he would be released. She also told us that her 2 brothers were already here and came in January, and she didn't know where they were. So we know, and we have criminal investigations ongoing of multifaceted criminal organizations, both domestic and international, that are profiting off this problem, profiting off the poor children that are being trafficked. And that's our primary goal of having those officers and agents down there, is to ferret out these traffickers and smugglers.
If I can add, Congresswoman, the year to date, and just to give you, put into context, on the CBP side, in the last 6 months of last fiscal year, we identified 466 fraudulent families. So far, in the first 6 months of this fiscal year, we're up to 3,500, just over 3,500 fraudulent families. So we're, again, working right alongside our colleagues in ICE on this very, very important issue.
Yeah, and thank you very much. I mean, we do have a crisis. I mean, some people, I think, might be denying it, but it's right in front of our eyes. This is a humanitarian crisis and a security crisis, so thank you for your work. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from New Mexico, Ms. Xochitl Torres, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Rice. Thank you also, Ranking Member Higgins. And thank you all for being here. As you know, Border Patrol is currently under immense strain, partly due to an administration's metering and remain in Mexico policies, which are pushing some migrants to cross the border between ports of entry, often in areas like the one that I represent, which is rural and remote. In my district in southern New Mexico, Border Patrol checkpoints have been suspended, and many agents have been recalled from the field to assist with processing individuals voluntarily presenting along the border. In speaking to a Border Patrol agent in my district, he said, "We are not a detention center agency. We are a law enforcement agency." And I couldn't agree more. This is why CBP must be doing more to contract trained personnel to assist with non-law enforcement duties, such as feeding, transporting, and giving medical care when necessary to migrants. This would allow agents to return to their law enforcement responsibilities for which they are really trained. Mr. Perez, can you please describe how CBP is planning to allocate part of its fiscal year 2020 budget towards contracting for these non-law enforcement duties?
Thank you, Congresswoman. So in the fiscal 20 budget, as well as the, if I may, the supplemental requests, very much so the transportation, the care and feeding, the soft-sided facilities that we've raised, all those non-law enforcement related duties are not only already being contracted and actually contracts being pursued to be expanded because of the crisis we have at hand, but certainly in 20. Those are exactly the type of things that we're looking to get our officers and agents out of doing and bringing on more other folks to do those types of functions for us.
That's great to hear, Mr. Perez. Thank you so much. And how can Congress feel confident that the funds it appropriates for these very specific purposes, such as contracting services you just described, will not be reprogrammed for the administration's own priorities?
Well, I don't have the specific numbers right now, Congresswoman, but I will gladly get back to you on what it is we've already obligated of the funds we've been provided, and actually what it is we've already begun to spend this fiscal year as well, you know, with respect to what it is we're asking for, again, on the supplemental that is so critically important, you know, regarding the contracting and the like. So this, you know, just so that you have a good frame of reference of how it is we're investing all those monies.
And I'm sorry, my question was about future appropriations from Congress. You identified the need is still ongoing. How can we make sure that's where the money goes?
Well, it's unquestionably true, Congresswoman. We are frontline agents and officers are there to perform a law enforcement function, a national security function, first and foremost, certainly a humanitarian function given a crisis like the one we have in front of us, to make sure that we are fulfilling that mission responsibility to keep our community safe, keep drugs off the street, keep criminals from coming across our borders. That is where our focus will remain, and keeping, you know, again, the nation safe. And so I'm very confident that I can tell you that if and when we are able to bring on those contracts, get these types of roles filled with non-law enforcement types, that's something the agency will remain very interested in doing.
Thank you. I don't feel the assurance that I think we need to be able to work to support you in what needs to happen. And I think if there's any additional words you can lend to that, it would be very helpful for me to continue to advocate for these continued needs. I want to turn to investments in our ports of entry, which are also essential to our national security. Facts show that the majority of illegal drugs that come into the United States enter through legal ports of entry. For example, according to the CBP's own numbers, in fiscal year 2018, 90% of the heroin that was seized at ports of entry by CBP officers, while only 10% was seized between ports of entry by Border Patrol. Yet in recent years, not enough attention has been given to CBP's $5 billion land port of entry modernization backlog, or to the deployment of drug inspection technology at the ports of entry. My colleague, Ms. Rice, spoke about NII Tech, and I reinforce the need to invest there. Mr. Perez, as a former port director and the director of field operations, you know firsthand the importance of these investments. Do you believe the administration should be giving more funding priority to decrease the backlog of CBP's land port of entry modernization portfolio and to drug interdiction systems at ports of entry, such as these non-intrusive inspection technology?
Thank you, Congresswoman. I'm really grateful to the Congress for what it is we've received. I mentioned earlier about the recapitalization of a huge portion of the non-intrusive inspection fleet. That also we also received an incredible amount of funding as well for handheld technologies, for video surveillance and the like. And so those are investments we're absolutely looking forward to continuing to make and are part of the FY20 budget. With respect to modernization of the ports, that is also something that is a priority for us in respect to, there's so many of them that are outdated. We're living that every day right now with respect to Border Patrol stations and ports of entry. So facilities-wise, definitely, we have a few options there. We don't own all of those facilities. We have to work through GSA on a lot of times. But we also have, collaboration with the private, communities themselves where we can pursue some of those endeavors also.
Thank you, Mr. Perez. I know I'm out of time, but I look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Guest, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and to each of the witnesses, thank you for being here. I want to thank the men and women that serve under you for your service to our country. Throughout prior hearings that we've had, I believe that there has been testimony that we have a drug trafficking crisis along our southwest border, a human trafficking crisis, an immigration crisis, and now a humanitarian crisis. Would each of you agree that the current situation along our southwest border would fit in the definition of a crisis state based on everything that we have going on at this time?
Undoubtedly.
Yes, I do believe there's a crisis at the southwest border.
I do, Congressman, unlike anything I've ever seen in 26 years.
And Mr. Albence, in your report that you provided to us prior to your testimony, you say, I believe on page 3, that ICE seized over 1 million pounds of illegal narcotics in FY 2018. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And Mr. Perez, you also gave a figure in your report about narcotics that was seized. Would the amount seized by your agency be in addition to what Mr. Albence had in his report?
It would, Congressman. We collaborate often, the agencies, but those would have been deconflicted in addition to, yes.
So you report 1 million pounds of narcotics seized. Mr. Perez, you broke yours down. You said that y'all seized in that fiscal year 1.1 million pounds of marijuana, 282,570 pounds of cocaine, 248,132 pounds of methamphetamine, 6,552 pounds of heroin, and 2,463 pounds of fentanyl. Is that correct?
That is correct, Congressman.
Thank you. And please thank the men and women that you serve with. I think as the American public, as members of Congress, we often don't give you and the men and women that you work with the credit that you deserve. Because of your hard work, because you're standing there on the border, we have been able in a year to prevent millions of pounds of illegal drugs from coming into this country. So I would ask that when you return home to the men and women that you serve with, you let them know that there are members of the American public and members of the Congress that appreciate what they do on our behalf. I want to speak very briefly on the current immigration crisis that exists along our southwest border. Mr. Albence, you were saying in your report that there are currently 870,000 pending cases. Is that correct?
On the non-detained docket, so individuals not in custody, we have about 50,000 people in custody that are also pending.
Okay, so that would be in addition to the 870?
Correct.
So we have then roughly 920,000 pending cases?
That's a good approximation, yes.
And as I understand from media reports, the average wait time for a hearing is 2 years. Would that be approximately correct, give or take?
It depends on the location. In some years, it could be 2 years. In some places, the EYR is setting out court dates 3 to 4 to 5 years.
So we have people who are sometimes being released and they're given a court date to return in 5 years?
It's quite possible, yes.
I think there was testimony that y'all gave a few minutes ago, and I believe, Mr. Perez, you were the one that offered this. Do you believe that the best thing that Congress can do to alleviate the crisis along our southwest border is to fix our broken asylum process?
Yes, Congressman. In addition to, again, fixing Flores, the ability to keep families together through the entirety of an expedited immigration process and hearing and adjudication of their case, and fixing the TVPRA, or the ability to process unaccompanied alien children and repatriate them to non-contiguous countries like we do for Canada and Mexico if they are not being trafficked. Those are the three really primary areas of legal change that we absolutely need.
And my question is, until we fix those three issues, are we just basically managing a crisis along our southwest border?
I personally believe those are the most prevalent, unquestionably prevalent pull factors of what the phenomenon that we're seeing right now, and what the criminal alien smuggling organizations are very consciously exploiting and profiting off of.
Again, thank you for your service. Thank you for testifying today, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Chair now recognizes for 5 minutes the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Clark.
I thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank our ranking member, Mr. Higgins. We are a nation of immigrants. Our country's prosperity is inherently linked with our history of welcoming people from all corners of the earth. Diversity has been and continues to be our greatest strength. But Donald Trump sees strength through a different lens. When he sees an immigrant family, he sees a threat to our nation rather than an opportunity to enrich it. and he thinks ripping those families apart, not just at the border, but through bureaucratic maneuvers here in D.C. is somehow strong, but he's wrong. Congress has an obligation to get it right and to fix this inhumanity. So let me start by asking you, Mr. Albence, I want to get some ideas of current policy and how it's actually being implemented. In March, I actually sent a letter to DHS regarding ICE's immigration check-in policies, and I'm still waiting for a response. So I'm Congresswoman Clark from Brooklyn, New York. Traditionally, DHS has allowed immigrants to be accompanied by persons of their choosing during check-ins with ICE personnel. However, when I attempted to accompany Ravi Ragbir, a New York immigrant rights activist, to his check-in appointment this January, many members of our group, including elected officials, were denied entry to ICE's field office. So I'd like to know, what is DHS policy with respect to allowing members of the public, including family members, clergy, and public officials, in accompanying immigrants to facilities where ICE check-ins occur?
So I can get back with you with a specific policy with regard to how we manage the check-in process in many locations.
That's fine. That'll be good. If I can get that in writing, I'd like to know what the policy is.
And I'll check on your letter. I'm sorry for the delay.
Okay. And why has DHS's longstanding policy, which has been to allow folks to be accompanied, been changed?
Again, I'll get you a written response on that.
Very well. The Supreme Court appears likely to allow the administration to add a citizenship question to the 2020 census. This comes after a federal judge in New York ruled against adding the question, which would have forced everyone to answer whether or not they and others in their household are U.S. citizens. Federal law prohibits the census from sharing data with other federal agencies, such as ICE. But the laws have been circumvented before to target minority families. During World War II, the Census Bureau found a loophole so it could help the government identify Japanese Americans for internment. Will you commit, if the Supreme Court allows the citizenship question to appear in the 2020 census, not to seek any data whatsoever in violation of existing law regarding immigration status from the Census Bureau?
I would never ask any of my officers to do something in violation of law.
Very well. Ms. Renard and Mr. Perez, by the end of the summer, the president wants to sanction countries with visa overstay rates higher than 10%, including by potentially restricting entry from those countries. In plain English, that means tearing apart families simply because of the nation they hail from. The order cites 20 specific countries, 13 of which are on the continent of Africa. Caribbean nations like Jamaica and Haiti could also become targets. Last year, Donald Trump used vile language to describe Haiti, Central America, and the continent of Africa. Now the president is putting those words into action. Do you have any additional information about what specific restrictions Donald Trump intends to impose on nationals of visa overstay countries?
I do not, Madam Congresswoman.
Okay.
Nor do I.
Very well. Ms. Ronald, USCIS recently issued new guidance to asylum officers on adjudicating credible fear claims, directing them to be more confrontational and focus on discrepancies between testimony instead of the testimony itself. There may be a series of reasons as to why there are differences between the testimony given at Border Patrol compared to trained asylum officers. How are you planning to document those discrepancies? And given the serious life and death consequences of a negative finding, what kind of discretion are experienced asylum officers given to determine what is an allowable discrepancy?
Thank you for the question, ma'am. Our asylum officers, as you well know, are very, very well trained. We give them an extraordinary amount of training. We did recently update a lesson plan, which clarified to them that they need to address the credibility issue related to the individual themselves, both when they are looking to find a positive credible fear screening or a negative credible fear screening. In addition to that, what we ask them is that they do elicit testimony when they find discrepancies, and that is so that they can deconflict, but they still have the discretion to have a finding of a positive screening or a negative screening. We just want them to actually document the fact that they deconflicted any conflicts between what they told CBP when they entered and what they're telling us during the screening process.
I thank you for your responses. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We're now going to go into round 2 of questioning. Ms. Renaud, I want to ask you, I understand that USCIS is planning to close its overseas field offices, which I strongly oppose. Do you know if the State Department is planning to charge USCIS for the services that they would take over from USCIS?
Yes, they would charge us, and they already do so in a number of other locations.
So how would that save any money for the federal government and not actually result in an increase in costs? I understand why you need your personnel, why you would want to make that decision, but how do you think that's going to save money and not actually incur a higher cost?
It's very costly to have individuals stationed overseas, and our cost analysis right now, based on the rates that Department of State is charging, shows that we will have a substantial amount of savings, although we are negotiating with them right now about those specific locations, so we won't have a solid number about the financial impact until we finish those negotiations for our 22 locations.
But it's also not just a financial impact, it's actually, can they handle the increase in the workload with the personnel that they have, or are they then going to turn around and request additional hires, which would increase the cost there, not just...
Excuse me, ma'am. The volume of work that we have is in our overseas offices is very minor compared to the work that state already has. So we don't believe that they will need to plus up. They may hire some of our locally engaged staff that are trained in that work already, and it gives them trained personnel to be able to continue.
When is that decision likely to be made?
We are in negotiations right now with the state. We started maybe 10 days ago, the conversations with them about the cost related to these particular functions. So we expect over the next 30 or 60 days we'd finalize those costs.
Mr. Perez, you have testified here today that the CBP is already greatly understaffed. Why do you think that CBP is going to be able to handle credible fear interviews for asylum seekers instead of trained USCIS officials?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. What we're doing now is just pursuing a pilot, working with our colleagues at CIS, and essentially just looking for any and every tool in the toolbox that we can apply to try to streamline, make more effective, more efficient the process and all the different administrative responsibilities that we have at the border. Again, we're working on a pilot alongside CIS right now, and you know, where and how we evaluate those results will remain to be seen once we're done.
So has the pilot, has it started or not?
No, we're in the process of our agents now getting trained. Again, as Ms. Renaud mentioned, it is very extensive training to be able to do that work. They will also be supervised by a CIS supervisor while we perform this pilot. And again, we're just using every tool in the toolbox we have available to us in an effort to try to be as innovative as we can to make more efficient, you know, the backlogs and the complexities of what we're facing at the border right now.
And how are you paying for that training process for these agents?
I believe we actually included in the supplemental request some funding for that. Other than that, that'll be just coming out of our base funding.
Okay, so Mr. President, I just want to stay with you for another question. Actually, let me just ask you on that note, where will, I know it's only in the pilot phases, but where will Border Patrol agents actually conduct the credible fear interviews? Will they be in the field or at the ports of entry?
It'll be in a field location, but we're still working on determining exactly where.
Okay. So we have spoken about the DHS's targeting and surveillance of people who are known to either work with or advocate for migrants. I had highlighted the case of the 59 people, mostly Americans, who are on a CBP list entitled San Diego Sector Foreign Operations Branch Migrant Caravan FY 2019 Suspected Organizers, Coordinators, Instigators, and Media. Can you tell us how these 59 people were targeted and who compiled the list and who ordered that list to be made?
The matter and the allegations you're talking about, Madam Chairwoman, are being investigated by our Office of Inspector General at the department right now. What I can tell you is once we were made aware that we very diligently not only reported it to our Department of, or Office of Inspector General, but our Office of Professional Responsibility augmented and is supporting them in that same investigation. And what I can assure you is that we do not target any group based on profession, based on ethnicity, or anything of that nature. And so when and if we see any of those types of allegations, we take them very seriously. What we absolutely do is manage the risk of any potential threat that comes to the border. So they're working on that investigation. We're waiting to see what the outcome is.
And is your internal OPR analysis done yet?
They would be in a supportive role, our Office of Professional Responsibility, to the Office of Inspector General's investigation.
So they don't come up with their own results?
Not during, it is my understanding that no, not when an Office of Inspector General investigation has taken on that case.
And you have not been informed by OPR of any findings that they have made regarding that case?
Not anything that I can disclose at this time.
So you have, but you can't disclose it until after the
Well,
OIG
it's a sensitive investigation, so although I have some general awareness, although not definitive findings, but general awareness of what occurred, again, I have to defer to investigators to let them pursue the entirety of that investigation until it's concluded.
So can you tell us if this kind of targeting is still being done by CBP?
Again, Madam Chairwoman, thank you. We do not tolerate targeting or profiling of any type for anybody's profession, any ethnicity, any type of profiling at all. What we do is manage threats and risks based on potential criminality, criminal activity, and of such, or criminal histories. We do not tolerate that at all within our workforce, never have, absolutely we never will, and we take very, very seriously any of those allegations, run them to ground to the best of our ability.
Are you aware as to whether this activity occurred in other areas of the country outside of the San Diego area?
I'm not aware.
So there is a case in San Francisco where the CBP ordered an Apple employee to hand over his company-owned phone and laptop. The employee did not decline, but asked to speak to attorneys at Apple because he had signed a non-disclosure agreement and his devices held corporate information. CBP told him he had no right to an attorney and eventually let him leave, but revoked his global entry status, which you can imagine had an immediate effect on his ability to travel for work. Questioning by officers clearly indicates CBP knew about his past jobs and perhaps his social views. Do you know if this was also a part of a targeting effort by CBP, and were you aware of this incident?
I'm not aware of the incident, Madam Chairwoman. I'd gladly get back to you with a little bit more specificity of what we can share.
Great, I would appreciate that. Thank you. Mr. Higgins?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Regarding the 920,000 pending cases, you stated, good sir, that with 870,000 pending cases, and you said there was another 50,000 to my colleague. Of that number, what of that number, clarify for us, please, have been released on summons?
I don't have the exact number. I can look to see what we have. We would release them depending on the circumstances. They may be bonded out by an immigration judge.
And not bond. I'm talking about initial summons that would have to been after apprehension, found to be a misdemeanor crossing, and
Right, so,
no other
if
pending felony warrants, and they're released. They're released with a summons to be contacted for a court date.
Right.
That
so-
number, give us a round figure, please.
Yeah, so all those individuals are placed with, depending on the type of entry which they made and the encounter, whether they overstayed their visa, whether they entered the country illegally, are issued a notice to appear or a charging document.
Okay, and what roughly is that number?
That's all those individuals that I mentioned are in that process because they were given a charging document. So that 920,000 are all in that process because they've been charged with an immigration violation.
All right, when an American citizen bonds out after initial arrest, he's given bond instructions, which include the clarification that it's incumbent upon that American citizen to maintain contact with the judicial system if he has a change in phone number, address, et cetera. If an American citizen is granted parole after sentencing or remanded to probation and parole with suspended sentence, the clarification is given as well. It's incumbent upon that American citizen to maintain contact with the judicial system. Of these pending cases of illegal immigrants that have been given summons, one of the common complaints is that we hear from them when we listen compassionately. They say, well, we were never contacted by the court. So would you clarify for us, please, and anyone can answer this, is it incumbent upon the judicial system to maintain contact with that released illegal immigrant, or is it incumbent upon the illegal immigrant to maintain contact with the judicial system?
So a lot of the aliens that are not in custody do have reporting requirements. They would report to ICE, actually. They would not report to the immigration courts. So they would report to ICE with regard to, on a periodic basis.
Law enforcement.
On a periodic basis. However,
that's
it's
my
also
meaning.
their responsibility, if they change their address, to notify the Executive Office of Immigration Review, which is a jurisdiction for the court.
Just to move on, what you're stating is that it's incumbent upon the offender or the suspect to maintain communication with the system,
They're
not the
required to
other way around.
Right, they're required to
Thank
comply.
you. Moving to, let's discuss, if we can, Deputy Commissioner Perez, the justification for the additional miles of enhanced physical barriers, 21st century technology, access roads, and border law enforcement personnel. My understanding, the 2018 Border Security Improvement Plan was mandated in the fiscal year 2018 appropriations bill. After distribution to the Appropriations Committee, this plan was subsequently shared with this committee upon our request. Who at CBP had input in this comprehensive plan to secure our southwest border? Were the men and women on the ground consulted?
Thank you, Congressman. Absolutely, yes. So it was a combination, first and foremost, of our field leadership and field agents, as well as the program office in headquarters.
Thank you for that clarification in limited time. So agents and operators in the field, what you're saying is actually had input into the analysis that identified the need for hundreds of additional miles of enhanced physical barrier, 21st century technology, access roads, and law enforcement personnel to gain operational control of the southwest border. Is that your statement, sir, that the men and women on the field made this determination, not bureaucrats in D.C. and not politicians in D.C.?
Yes, Congressman. They had a significant amount of input in all that, first and foremost.
And are you aware that appropriations was included in the 2018 appropriations bill for the Border Security Improvement Plan?
Yes, Congressman.
This is what we're trying to accomplish in this fiscal year as well.
Indeed, indeed.
Gentlemen, madam, thank you very much for your appearance today. We're going to get this thing hammered out. We have faith in each other on both sides of the aisle and confidence in your professional performance. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So I just want to clarify, Mr. President, I appreciate the fact that the men and women on the ground were asked for input, but the priorities were set right here in Washington. Isn't that correct?
There's a program management office, Madam Chairwoman, that handles, and put together alongside the agency folks who built the Border Security Improvement Plan, that oversees all the activity of the wall planning and procurement and processing. Nevertheless, again, the prioritization, the types of solutions that are put forth and were put forth was, first and foremost driven by the experiences and the folks in the field, the leadership we have in the field, the ground agents, based on, again, decades of their experience of what it is they've known to have worked and will work along the border.
Was every single recommendation that the men and women on the ground suggested taken and actually implemented by the powers that be here in Washington?
I wouldn't know to that degree of detail, Madam Chairwoman. What I would expect is that we took everything that they suggested in, and then nevertheless,
But you can't
worked
answer.
through
You
with
can't
them.
answer that question. I mean, you're making it seem as if everyone here in Washington just listened to what was said on the ground, and that there was no policy coming out of Washington. I just don't think you're in a position to say that that is true.
Well, it was a collaborative process, Madam Chairwoman, is what I'm saying, in that it first and foremost, the experience and the considerations and the input of the field leadership and of the frontline agents was really the driver behind the design and the implementation.
But the
It was a
overall
collaborative-
policy, as it is in most organizations, comes from the top down, right?
I'm not sure which policy you're referring to.
Any policy usually comes from the top down, right? Wouldn't that be fair to say?
Usually, yes.
Okay. Ms. Xochitl Torres?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ranking Member. The work that you do is incredibly hard, and I want to recognize that. I want to recognize that it's getting even harder and more complex with the different people who are approaching the border now, families who are approaching. It's something to adapt to these changing circumstances and to constantly adapt as you have, to continue to respond to needs. But we've seen these challenges grow. And we are all in it together, from agents on the line and officers on the line to communities along the border to the families that are voluntarily presenting and members of Congress trying to figure out what to do and how to work together to make it happen. I just want to recognize and respect the work that you do. Thank you. And communities really are feeling it along the border, too. I have communities who are working incredibly hard to help when families are bonded out, to help them reach those families so they can better comply with the orders they've been given. And sometimes it's really hard because with the increasing numbers presenting along the border, they're not always getting the right paperwork that has all the information that they need. Border Patrol is incredibly strained right now, and so being able to provide all of that paperwork has been difficult. And the coordination with these churches and other organizations that are working to help this happen sometimes slips through the cracks as well. So I want to recognize the work that is being done, and then also ask if CBP has any plans to improve that coordination with the local organizations for the release of these families.
Thank you, Congresswoman, for your recognition. I can tell you that our interaction with the non-governmental organizations, there's a handful of which, certainly in your district and all across the southern border, that collaboration is at an unprecedented high. We are absolutely grateful because we couldn't do what we're doing right now if not but for those non-governmental organizations, their collaboration not only with us but with ICE as well, and how we all come together to deal with, again, the humanitarian issues that we're confronting, the sheer volume of families. And so I assure you, we're talking to them just about every day, literally our folks on the ground every day, because we are moving hundreds of these families to them every day for them to place and help find where it is that they need to go. And look, do things like you just mentioned, raise to us if they do encounter maybe a typo or something that they don't understand quite with the paperwork that they've been given. But nevertheless, we're very grateful, and I assure you that's something that's going to be ongoing.
And I would just to clarify, one of the big challenges is just whether or not the families or the individuals get pictured, the processing paper, if it has a picture, a photograph of them, because that's what allows them to take a flight to reach their sponsor, if that's what their sponsor the person who sponsored their bond pays for. Do you have any plans to try to make sure, because it's something that ICE has done very well, is that when they produce that paperwork, it has that photograph, which allows the travel. Is that something that you're working towards standardizing?
I will go back, Congresswoman, and check on that and make sure that, whatever it is the standard is being applied.
Thank you. And for FY20, can you talk about any plans for that budget to better assist with that local government and NGO coordination?
I'm not aware of any specific line item called out for that, but unquestionably, even as we were talking earlier about some of the contractual arrangements, All of that plays into some of that, the type of work, if you will, that that would end up with interaction and coordination with the non-governmental organizations. So, as I said before, even as we expect to find solutions and want to work with you all to find solutions to this immediate crisis, we're part of those communities, and the NGOs are our neighbors as well, and so that collaboration from a professional level will never wane. And in fact, again, we're very grateful for what we have right now.
Thank you. I yield my time.
Thank you, Ms. Clark.
Thank you once again, Madam Chair. Ms. Renaud, I wanted to circle back because I'm just trying to wrap my arms around this new policy of training Border Patrol to be trained asylum officers, and wanted to get a sense from you that since the guidance went into effect on April 30th, what is the daily average number of interviews completed by an asylum officer?
Are you, excuse me, if I can clarify, are you talking about credible fear screening?
I'm sorry, yes, credible.
So the credible fear screening takes about 2 hours per individual. So they will, depending on how long they're going to be in any particular facility that day, they can do up to 3 or 4.
Okay. And has that been an increase or a decrease since April 30th?
The April 30th lesson plan has not put into effect yet. It'll be put into effect mid-May, but we don't expect that it'll have a substantial difference. The 2 hours has been pretty consistent for several years.
And how do you certify sort of the training of the Border Patrol officer?
So the Border Patrol officers are conducting, they've already done, as of the end of this week, 2 weeks of distance training where they've read a number of lesson plans and other materials. They will begin their in-person training next week, and they will have several weeks of in-person training at our asylum office, conducted by our asylum officers, where they will do some mock interviews. They will have some training classes. They will observe some actual credible fear screenings that are being conducted by experienced asylum officers. Once we feel they're ready to actually start conducting some credible fear screenings, we will have those be monitored, and we will supervise them as they're doing it to make sure that they're going in the right direction. And then, as Mr. Perez mentioned, once we feel that they're able to go out on their own and do credible fear screenings, our supervisory asylum officers will supervise that workload that they do. That includes the 100% check that the supervisors do of our own employees. We will do the same thing with Border Patrol.
And so do you have a timeline for when this will begin, since the guidance went into effect on April 30th?
So the Border Patrol agents will be finished their training in late May, so they'll begin actually doing the screening in late May or early June, depending on Mr. Perez's direction.
And Mr. Perez, do you have a certain number of Border Patrol agents that will be specific to the credible fear screening process, or is this going to become an additional duty of your average everyday officer?
Thank you, Congresswoman. For the pilot, because it is just a pilot now, I believe there's 10 agents that are in training with Ms. Renaud's folks right now. Mm-hmm. We have identified another 2 groups, I believe, of 20 to 25 each. So it's about a total of maybe 50 to 60 total agents, again, that we'll initially utilize in the pilot. It really will beckon and depend on the outcomes that we all realize as to whether or not, we continue to move forward and what type of investments we make subsequent to that.
Would this be an additional duty for your officers, or would they be specifically relegated to sort of that initial screening for credible fear, or, determining whether someone should move forward?
those are some of the exact details, Congresswoman, that right now in the planning for the actual pilot and its implementation that we're working through right now. So I'm not aware that we've made those final determinations.
The 10 officers right now are strictly dedicated to this training, or do they have other duties?
I believe right now they may be primarily only doing the training because of the time consumption of what it is to receive the training. But again, I'd gladly get back to you on that.
Yes, would you get back to us and try to give us as much as you can about how their time would be delegated if it were to be sort of a hybrid or an additional duty to their regular duties?
Once we have the pilot up and running, gladly to share with that.
Absolutely. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back, and I thank you all for your testimony here today.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. I want to thank all the witnesses for being here today, and for Mr. President, Mr. Albans, I know you spent some time before today with the ranking member and with myself, and I appreciate you taking the extra time for that. I think it makes for a more substantive hearing. I know it's very difficult to sit there for the 2 hours that you've been there and answer a bunch of questions from us, but I think this is such an incredibly important conversation, because not only does it have the ability, give us the ability to identify maybe where we need to fix things, but it does, as Ms. Xochitl Torres and everyone else up here has said, give us an opportunity to recognize the hard work that all of you are doing in a very difficult environment. So thank you all very much. I want to thank you again for your testimony. I want to thank the members for their questions. The members of the subcommittee may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing to those questions. With that, I ask unanimous consent to insert 3 statements into the hearing record from the National Treasury Employees Union, Southern Border Communities Coalition, and Church World Service. Without objection, the subcommittee record shall be kept open for 10 days. Hearing no further business, the subcommittee stands adjourned.